that is the most beautiful thing about faith, and that's just incredible because that love, that beauty, that wanting to connect, that is in Christianity, that is in Judaism, that is in Islam, that is in all the religions. It can be such a beautiful thing. And we complicate things.
Solidarity sister, solidarity sister. Happy Valentine's Day and welcome to another episode of Solidarity Sister with Kristen Wilson. So I had this fantastic idea that before I launched my podcast, I wanted to get several interviews under my belt so that I could stay consistent. If you are new to the show, you might not know that I have 8 children. 7 still live at home. There's all kinds of chaos all the time. And so I thought if I had some banked interviews, it would help me to not miss a week, which is true. But also I am finding that I cannot get the interviews then out fast enough. I have these great interviews and some of them have been sitting now for a little bit because I did so many initially. And this episode you're going to listen to today, I actually recorded in December. But it's so good, and it's going to be so good now, even though, after waiting all this time. Rebecca Schlosser has a great energy about her. She has her own podcast. You'll hear about that. She has trained in yoga and in breathwork, and she is into community and building community and being able to find also that balance between where to show up and lean into community and where sometimes we might actually need a little time for ourselves and to be able to just sit with ourselves. And I think this is really a beautiful conversation. I also loved the way that we got to exchange some ideas. We don't have the same backgrounds, but we really do share a lot of the same values, and there's so much beauty in being able to connect on important values that really all of us in humanity, regardless of our differences, should be able to come together on. So enjoy this episode. So tell me, how are you doing today? Like for real?
For real, for real. All right, all the blooming and healing talk aside, I had one of those days where I feel like I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. And again, no toxic positivity here. It is totally possible for any human being to wake up and feel a little emotionally disheveled, even if we practice. That's why we practice. It's a tool. It's not some engraved, sign saying that we're perfect. Oh, I meditate, so everything's fine. I woke up a little bit kind of off because I woke up in the middle of the night due to hail. So another thing about living in New Mexico and living in the high desert is sometimes we get the hail. We tend to get it during the winter when there's rain and snow, and then sometimes in the summer rainy season, and it like pounds down on your roof. It pounds down on everything. You feel like thousands of people are throwing rocks at your house. So I woke up in the middle of the night, kind of struggled to go back to sleep. And then I just feel like this morning was a little bit kind of scattered, but I'm getting back to my good chi, my good balance.
I love that. We can always recenter, and sometimes we have to recenter lots of times on the same day. Like
yes.
Some days
yes.
it's easier, some days it's harder, but we can keep doing it. So I love that. Tell me a little bit about your podcast.
Okay, so the podcast is Bloom with a Boom. My little subtitle is Wisdom from My Prickly Path. So, Kristen, you can relate to that being from Utah. I'm from New Mexico. The prickly path is all those cactus lined hiking trails with all the little sharp succulents along it. And to me, it's the perfect metaphor for how life is beautiful and also prickly at times. So, Bloom with a Boom, Wisdom from My Prickly Path. My last 6 years of living in Albuquerque have definitely been a path of sorts of growth, of tremendous growth. And the podcast is about blooming, healing, and blooming. It's about, reaching our branches out and doing things at all ages of life that feel authentic, whether it's a new project or just anything like a trip that we finally plan, anything that we're doing. And it's also about the inner work sometimes that we need to do to get there. So I've got training in yoga. I studied 2 different types of yoga and took the training programs in them. I also have a chanting practice. And I believe there's never too much breath work and breathing exercises. And from time to time, I share some of those modalities and actual, even some live shares in my Facebook group for Bloom with a Boom podcast as well.
I love
So it's a
that.
healing space and a blooming space.
I love that. And it includes that there is a prickly path. We're not in the toxic positivity space. We're in the like, hey, there are prickles and there's healing and there's blooming and
Yes.
both. And I love that.
Uh-huh.
So you and I met through a podcasting community, which has been great. And I'd love to just hear more about what community means to you, where you're finding community connections, whether it's in real life or whether it's online. What does community mean to you at this phase of life?
It's funny. I just had this come up in a podcast episode, something similar to this, where I was doing the interview. I had a guest on my podcast, and we were really talking about community as just being it's our natural path towards growth. We're not meant to be living in isolation. And even sometimes the messaging can get a little unclear in the healing and kind of new age space because there's meditations and there's silent retreats, and we hear about going off into the wilderness and camping for days alone, and people that have very powerful isolation practices. But most of us need some kind of community. Living in isolation, being in isolation is not going to be sustainable for our growth long term, or at least speaking from personal experience. Community is super important. I feel that during the pandemic, I'm going to bring that one up because it was a big roadblock to our ability to be in
100%.
community. And we all know that many of us went bonkers. Locking a bunch of people in their houses, not always a good idea, especially people in areas where it's not houses, it's apartment complexes, and you're kind of huddled into yourself. My partner and I, we definitely hunkered down. We took the pandemic very seriously. We did what the CDC told us to do, and it took a while to get back into socializing. And even now, it's hard sometimes for me to just get the ball rolling. I'll say that I want to make a plan with somebody or we'll talk about it, but then actually sitting down, sending the text saying, well, how's next Thursday, clearing it with our family members when we're working from home. And right now, I'm not working a 9 to 5. I'm basically doing this podcast. That's a whole other story. I'm starting my life as a entrepreneur, developing my voice, but I'm home doing most of that. And it is hard to put ourselves out into social situations and to find that community. And I will say I am part of a local here in Albuquerque, a women's circle. So this is a group of women. It's kind of like a full moon circle. They do these ceremonies for the full moon and the new moon. So there's definitely some nice, yummy kind of metaphysical, woo woo aspect to that. I'm going to use the word woo woo because people can understand it. I think that we tend to judge it a little bit too much, but, not to make it that simple. It's a group of women where we bring song and sharing and just beautiful heart-centered experiences together, and it's always this amazing time. But Kristen, sometimes it is so hard to get out the door and get to those events. And a lot of times, first of all, I truly believe that we are affected by the moon, and especially if it's a new moon or a full moon, like one of those extreme moon cycles. And I am in my 40s and probably somewhere close to premenopausal or whatever. But I just feel so sometimes emotionally drained or tired or kind of in a weird space at the time of the full moon or the new moon where they're having these gatherings. And sometimes it's hard to get everything together in my day to get there to whoever's hosting it and to sit there with them. But the minute that I do get there, when I do make it, I'm so happy. And my energy is uplifted from the candles and the sharing and the beautiful things that women are bringing to the altar. But most importantly, the energy that they're bringing of openness and wanting to share and wanting to hold space for other women. So that is an incredible experience. We have these things in life, these aspects of life that are so good for us, whether it's coming into community or whether it's getting to the gym, whatever it is. And sometimes just getting there is the hardest thing. It's like we just that little negative conversation in our head that wants to hold us back sometimes just makes it hard. So I was very fortunate this last Monday, which was the new moon, to get to the new moon circle because I had missed like the last 3 or 4 circles. And even though some of the women, I'll see them, there'll be other gatherings besides these events. I just felt like I hadn't seen them in so long. And something like that will have an effect on me. So I think when we go into communities, we have this experience that really helps us flow into the next day or flow into our week, especially if we're working from home or if we're spending a lot of time at home.
So I'm kind of intrigued. I have never participated in a moon circle. So there are candles and you're sharing. Are you sharing like, I mean, I'm imagining the new moon, maybe it's about new aspirations, the things you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to move. I mean, like, what are you sharing? Is it a goal setting kind of a thing? Or is it like these things have been really hard and I want to leave them behind? Or like, generally.
It's all of it. It's all of it. So there are some song circles, there's an aspect of it that is a little bit, spiritual. I wouldn't say rooted in a particular religion, but there's a spiritual aspect of it of divine feminine and connecting with the earth and connecting with the moon. So there'll be different songs that people share. And it's not like there's a set number of specific songs that are done every time. It's not a service or anything super like it has to be that we sing these songs. It's not a religion. It's not a formal spiritual practice. It's women gathering. But a lot of the songs that the women feel called to bring to the circle, are about how empowering women and our sacred connection in the world and our sacred purpose, as women, as mothers, for those of us that are, as daughters, which we all are. So there is singing that takes place, which is always super uplifting. I have a chanting practice. That is a spiritual practice. And so I get a lot out of my chanting. That's like a meditation, but I really believe in the power of the voice, especially when we're coming in community and we're singing with other voices. So there's that aspect of it. And then women will share what they want to, it could be anything, what they've been going through, what they want to call into the next moon cycle. I love it for the community and the energy. Some of the women are very into astrology, very well versed that they'll know, okay, this is the moon in Sagittarius, and they'll, different people go to different lengths of how they really want to understand and intellectualize or internalize what a particular moon, or time in the earth, time in our lives, what that means. For me, I'm not so, it's not that I'm not into it. It's been a while since I've looked at my chart and I don't have as much of the astrology in my kind of daily dialogue as some of the other women, but I love the idea. You're in a group of women. It could be any time, but it's especially a powerful time when it's the beginning of a moon cycle or a full moon to set intentions or to say, this is what I want to bring into this next cycle. So sometimes the shares will be like that. Sometimes the shares will be just what we've been going through. It's really whatever we want to share. And it's always kept at circle. So we wouldn't
I
talk
love it.
about it outside or even approach somebody. Oh, you know what? Yesterday at the circle, you shared this. Sometimes there's reflections that we'll give each other, but it's always a very safe kind of confidential space.
Oh, I love that. So tell me more about your chanting. Is this like a more Gregorian chant, or is this more like a chant of a mantra, or
It's a
I
mantra.
okay. And do
I love being
interest?
asked about this.
Okay,
What were you
good.
saying? Sorry.
I was gonna say, and do you have like several different mantras? I mean, like I at one point was trying to do a Kundalini practice, and you do like sa ta.
Me too.
Is it sa ta man?
Satanama.
That's what it was. Okay. I actually worked on that at one point when I was doing a yoga therapy practice with someone that she calls her practice beyond breath, and it was all about like your breath and all of that. So I'm always interested when I hear someone like, what does your chanting practice look like?
Thank you. Well, this is so interesting and juicy because Kundalini was one of the yoga trainings that I took, and I did learn a lot of those chants. And so previous to that, about 15 years ago, I discovered Buddhism. And there's different types of Buddhism. The type of Buddhism that I discovered had basically originated in Japan. And well, the original Buddha, Siddhartha, was in India. We know that, but then, life, centuries happen. So this particular chanting practice dates back to, I guess, the 12th or 13th century in Japan. I'm not as memorizing of the facts as some other people in my practice. Starting to pick up a theme here. I don't always take it all in, but I take in what I need. And so this is a chanting practice that basically involves chanting a mantra either alone or together in a shared space. And there is a Buddhist center pretty much wherever you live. There's chapters everywhere for this Buddhism. And it's chanting a mantra repeatedly. And that is very powerful. So there is the philosophy behind it, which, without getting too deep, it's basically we are chanting for the things we want and we're calling forward our kind of creative energy, our ability. So the basic law of the universe is cause and effect. That's kind of the main principle of Buddhism. We're kind of igniting that positive cause and effect through our chanting, and we're also raising our awareness. So a lot of times people refer to it as polishing a mirror. We chant to a mandala. It's called a gohanzen. It's like an altar. Most of us who chant will get this mandala on our altar. And I say mandala because it's a generic term. It's called the gohanzen, which is the term in this practice. And the terms don't matter. It's our altar. They do matter, but it's okay. I don't want to give the information out like a fire hose. But the point is, as we are chanting, we're looking at this mandala, the gohanzen, and it's considered a metaphor as like a mirror of our life. So we're polishing our mirror. We're being able to see ourselves and our circumstances and perceive them on a more consciously elevated level. So chanting, in short terms, it elevates our life condition. And that sounds very broad, but it's a good way to put it because there are so many things that it does. I get more energy on a physical level, I get more clarity, more energy, more calm. And then on a much deeper level, as I'm chanting, I'm kind of invoking that manifestation. So we start to chant for things that we really want to have. And sometimes things will fall into place and I won't even realize that I had been consciously chanting for it. It's like, it doesn't have to be up here in our head. It's more like everything that we really, really want in a deep level kind of comes out, and our chanting puts it out there. It's a prayer. It's a prayer
That's
and
exactly the
it's a
word I was thinking.
meditation.
It sounds like it's a form of prayer, actually.
Yeah.
Like that it's really that's where you're coming from. So what kind of words would you, is it more like a sata nama, or is it more like a I want
I'll
to
tell
know
you the words.
like, do you know what I mean? Like what are you
The
chanting?
words are the words are Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And if you want, Kristen, for anybody that wants, I can include the words. I can give you the words so you can put them in the show notes. And I can also send a link to a very short podcast episode I created, which is just like 5 minutes of chanting, or not even.
Absolutely, we'll
So
do that
people
so that
can
anyone
try
who's
it.
interested and wants to give this a go, that they know where to
Yeah.
go. And because I would have to also see that written for me to be able to say it properly, I think. What does that mean? What does that translate to? Does it have an English translation?
Yeah, so because it's ancient language, the translations are always a little bit kind of skirty. Like there's sometimes multiple ways you can say it, but it basically means sacred devotion to the mystical law of cause and effect through sound and vibration. And the Nam part at the beginning is the sacred devotion, but then the rest of it, Myoho Rengekyo, that is actually we're getting really geeky here with Buddhism, but that is actually the title to the Lotus Sutra, which is the last of the sutras that were written. So that word said over and over again is powerful. And people in this practice, people who are, because it is a faith practice, most people, they might do yoga or they might do other mind body modalities. But most people, when they sit down to chant, it's like, just not like, oh, this is the only thing to chant, but that is what they prioritize chanting. They will chant, they believe that chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo is the most powerful chant. And same thing in other religions. Every religion is going to be like, not mine's the best, but mine is, they're centering their truth in whatever prayer or whatever they're choosing to share. So what was interesting, I'm mentioning that because when I started Kundalini, and that is a yoga practice, all of a sudden I'm exposed to a practice that recommends all these different chants for all, I don't know how far you got in Kundalini, but there's so many different chants for different things. So here on one hand, I had been, introduced to this Buddhist practice where we have this one chant. There's also a prayer that we say daily, but the main thing is this one chant that is like the chant. It is the practice, and that it's something that everybody, has this ability to do and to benefit from. And then I find Kundalini, and these chants are taught more as like modalities, like in a yoga class. So, for example, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, the Buddhist chant, we would never sell that. Like, we wouldn't have a class where it's like, okay, you're going to pay me some money and I'm going to teach you this chant. I might include it in the context of a yoga class or something else, but I even have a block around that because one of the main principles is this is a faith practice. It's not a yoga class. This is something that we are sharing with the world. But in Kundalini, these spiritual chants, and there's many of them, are kind of brought into the context of teaching people a modality. It's a little bit different, but the effect, I think, is very similar.
That is so fascinating.
I am totally rambling, so thank you.
No, I love learning about new things and about different faiths, and I have friends who Buddhism, I'm learning more and more, means a lot of different things. Like there's some general principles, but that I know Christians who consider themselves Buddhist Christians or Christian Buddhists, I don't know which way you'd say it, but that they're able to pull in these different practices and beliefs. So many of these things really are universal. The law of the harvest is kind of a universal law. Like we reap what we sow. That is generally how it works. Sometimes it doesn't happen in the exact same timing in which we expect something to work. But like there are just these, the golden rule can be found in all different places. And I love being able to connect on the commonalities of that and have that be something that brings us together to say, hey, we both believe in having a faith practice. We both believe in centering in a form of prayer. We both believe in connecting to something bigger than ourselves rather than getting caught up in, well, you don't believe this exact thing the way I believe it, so therefore it should divide us. No, like I love the common ground of being able to say we can be women of faith who are doing our best to connect intuitively to the divine, whatever that looks like for
Yep.
you. For me, it looks like
Yes.
being a Christian. It doesn't look like that for everyone, but I honor the faith of so many people when it is done in a way that is making you a better person. It is helping you have a more positive impact in the world. And people of all different religions and religious practices, there are people within those that are doing that it's making them better. I am a better person because of my faith, 100%. But not everyone who attends the same church that I would attend is having that same experience.
Yes.
Being part of that specific religion doesn't automatically improve you. So much of it has to do with where you're connecting with true principles and where you're allowing God or your savior or the universe or the divine to lead you into being a better
Yes.
form of yourself. So I love being able to connect on those things and say, hey, like these are good things. We can show up, become better ourselves and show up better in community. These practices, they're centering us, they're grounding us, they're helping us to be a better human.
Any religion, if it can do that to you, that is the most beautiful thing about faith, and that's just incredible because that love, that beauty, that wanting to connect, that is in Christianity, that is in Judaism, that is in Islam, that is in all the religions. It can be such a beautiful thing. And we complicate things so much, when those, we call them in Buddhism, those devilish functions, those darker shadow sides of our humanity come out. And sometimes in the name of faith or religion, to me, that's not real faith. That's, that's using the faith as a weapon.
Yeah,
Or
I agree with that.
sometimes it is there, you have cults and extremists where, yeah, like they actually believe that that's what they pray to, that division, that power. But I'm not one to say, well, then let's just throw out faith and God doesn't exist. I think it makes us so much happier and so much better to have something that we can believe in. And I say believe in something outside of ourselves and inside of ourselves, because that's another Buddhist thing. It's both. It's within and it's without.
So I'd love to ask you if there is a time or multiple times that you can think of where you faced some really big life challenges and where community has either been helpful to you, people have been supportive, how they've shown up for you specifically, or where people have actually made it worse and what they've done that has made it worse for you. Kind of how you would
Hmm.
teach people to show up for each other.
Well, I think I want to excavate from the most recent back. So, right now actually is a pretty tough time for me. We are in holiday season. It is frenetic. I lost a parent in June. And while we're on the topic of religion, I was brought up Jewish. So, it's not even like Christmas, but you get to be an adult and it's not this is Hanukkah, that's Christmas. It's just the holiday season. So, not having my father here during the holiday season, I think is affecting me more than I realize.
There's an emptiness.
There's an emptiness, and I'll share a story. I don't know if this is a community story, but it's something that I'm really honored to be able to share it on a podcast. And I'm going to laugh at it now, even though I think I've been crying about it for the last 3, 4 days. You want to hear a fun story, a fun but not so fun in the time story about this? All right, Kristen, I'm
Absolutely.
going for it.
And
So, yeah, so this time of year has kind of been sucky, like, but also like joyful as well. It's been everything. But something that happened over the weekend, my partner and I were getting ready to go to a Hanukkah gathering at my stepsister's house. Now, I live here in Albuquerque. I moved out here basically following my father. He was not following him, but I made the choice to live near him and fell in love with the vibe out here. I'm from the East Coast. This is a different and better change of pace for me. But my life out here, my family out here was my father, his dog, my stepmother, and my stepsister was also out here. So even though my stepsister and I are not like all that close, we're not in a bad way. We just don't, net socialize outside of family gatherings. I was really excited to come and do a Hanukkah gathering because my father's not here and see my stepmother. Sure enough, and I was getting my partner on board to come with me, and he's always kind of shied away from social situations, especially particularly with religion. And he hasn't come with me to like the seders for Passover, but Hanukkah's not really so much of a sit down, and it's more of like a festive holiday. We don't really sit around and say prayers. It's one of the more fun Jewish holidays. You get to eat greasy food, the potato pancakes or the latkes. So we're all excited for this event, and as we're getting to the door, she's got these two aggressive dogs, and she's got 4 dogs total right now because my stepmother's living there, but 2 of them are kind of aggressive and they don't really do a great job, not to be judgy, of controlling them. Anyway, as we're walking in, one of them, my partner's behind me, and I'm just thinking that they're being aggressive with him because he's like, I'm not sure I want to come in. And it snowballed into him having to go back to the car. And I called him and I asked him, are you okay? And I'm already in at this point, and they've already put the dogs away. But he said that one of the dogs bit him. And a dog bite is a dog bite. There was no blood or marks or anything, but he was just not having it at that point. He's like, they don't know what he was just not happy with them mainly. And the best he could do, short of like being confrontational, was just leave. So we didn't get to go in and do this holiday gathering. And that was a buzzkill. I certainly I'm annoyed at the situation. I'm mostly annoyed at how the situation with the dogs. It's not his fault. I support him, but sometimes these things happen, and it's like the holidays, right? So we just got to kind of kind of feel our feelings about it. And then at this point, I'm laughing it off. I'm like, gosh, I could not have written that. I could not have like imagined that up.
I think you bring up some good points because sometimes we have these expectations for holiday gatherings, for getting together in their community with family, that it's going to be like the Hallmark movies. Like I love Hallmark movies. I like don't watch TV all year long. I don't watch movies hardly at all. Sometimes I'll sit down and watch something with my kids. That's a kid movie, but generally I don't watch TV. I don't know what's on TV. But then Hallmark movie season comes and I'm like all in. But that's not reality. That's just not real life. And I love those and I love the escape of them and I love the feeling of it and that it's all going to turn out so beautifully.
Mhm.
And we do have those kind of beautiful moments. There are Hallmark movie moments in our lives. There are times where the lighting really just is right. And we look at our partner and we think, I'm so grateful to be with you. Or we look at our children and something happens and we think, I love watching you perform. This is so beautiful. Like, I love this. But then there are the parts where, like, the dog bites your partner and the whole night feels
Yep.
ruined. And part of being able to stay in a family community is to be able to navigate that with where are the times that you have to pull back. So maybe tonight's
Yeah.
actually not going to work out, but we don't hate you. We aren't like this isn't like ruining everything. Like this night is kind of not the greatest. We're going to regroup. We'll see each other another day. We'll try again. We'll show up again. And we're not going to hold that against each other because it doesn't always go the way we want it to. Any kind of celebration, whether it's the holiday time or it's the birthday party or it's the baby shower or whatever the thing is, the life event that brings us together, that sometimes we have to
Exactly.
stay for a minute and regroup. And it doesn't have to
Yes.
ruin everything, but sometimes it escalates because then someone's offended that this, and then it like, but being able to just give each other space when we need it.
Absolutely. And I'll say this that the next day, talking about that, the polarities of isolation or when we need our kind of recuperation time and community, the next day was a Sunday. So this was last weekend. And I'll tell you what my little healing tool was, because there's a stigma out there that watching too many TV shows can be bad for our brain and get us depressed. And I subscribe to that to a certain degree. I don't do what I have done at other stages of life where I'm watching TV all the time every day. I'm much more into creative projects and stuff now. But I'll tell you, I was exhausted on Sunday. I actually went to a hot yoga class in the morning. I've kind of been getting into the heated yoga. And after that, even though it was energizing, I ended up what I needed for myself on Sunday after that experience, even though I felt lonely that I hadn't seen my family, what I needed was to watch back-to-back episodes of The Last of Us, which is like the zombie apocalypse. It's definitely not a Hallmark movie. I needed to bring that grime into my, like, I was already kind of there, so I'm like, well, I might as well be entertained in this grimy space. I want some company in my grimy space. And I needed to have that isolation. And actually, that led into Monday, and I almost didn't go to this. So this is now tying into the new moon circle that I talked about. Monday was a new moon circle, so getting together in community, and I almost didn't go. And I remember saying to somebody in a chat, I said, yeah, sometimes we need to be, even when we feel lonely, we need to be in isolation just long enough to know that very heart of everything is us. And I needed a moment to be okay with that isolation and to know that I am still my company. And then something after sharing about that in a chat group, because we have a little chat group in this women's circle, that got me going to the Monday night event, which was wonderful. And then Tuesday, I was a mess. I was a crying mess. So it's up and down. And sometimes community gatherings can nurture us. Sometimes, even if it's nothing negative, sometimes they can be exhausting too when we're going through a lot. So sometimes it's not. You asked about, are there times that the community hasn't been helpful? In my recent years, I've had the luck of having very nurturing, loving communities of people. But sometimes just being in the community, there's times when we feel a little drained or we say, you know what? there's everyone here is being so loving and so nice, but I'm not ready for this. I need to go and cocoon a little bit more.
I love that. Being able to protect your own peace and kind of tune in and listen to what your body's telling you and what your
Yep.
emotions are telling you. And sometimes we can have these really joyful days and these really wonderful experiences. And sometimes we might need a day to cry and process some emotions and move forward from that. And really, I think so much of our conversation is come to this ability to accept each day where it is and what it's presenting to us, and take the good and take the bad and take the challenges and take the joy and accept it as just part of the human experience. That's real life. Real life is all ends of the spectrum are representative, and that's what we're experiencing. So if you had a gigantic billboard that everyone in the world would see, what message would you send to people?
I would say, remember to breathe, and in quotes, but don't, this is probably too long for a billboard, but don't worry, I'm not telling you to take a breath. Because it's funny, I started my breathwork journey as a kid, and I'm talking about not just taking some deep breaths, but actually going and having the modality of somebody guide me through a deep, and there's lots of different types of breathwork therapy. Jen Liss in our circle is a breathwork facilitator. But my father kind of got into breathwork when I was, before there was an internet, before it was, sexy, and before the word
Like
woo
an
woo was
early
even a thing.
adopter of breath work. That's awesome.
Yeah, he was like kind of getting into it and got me into these breathing exercises. And he would then use it to parent me, take a breath, just take a breath. And I think so many times a person tells us to take a breath, usually when they're the ones that need to do it, or it's like that, it's like that passive aggressive defense, like, remember your peace as I push you around, or something like that. Like, you're not entitled to your feelings, take a breath. And it just triggers me anytime somebody says take a breath. It triggered me when I was a kid with, okay, I'm grounded. That's why you're telling me to take a breath, because I'm angry that I'm grounded. And then now, fast forward to now, I'm a yoga teacher. I'm not actively a yoga teacher right now, but I have the trainings and I've worked as a yoga teacher. Who is this person to tell me to take a breath? I'm the master of breath. Of course, we're not the master of anything. But at the same time, as obnoxious as those words can be in the dynamics of a strained conversation, invitations to breathe, tuning into those breathwork facilitators that can guide us through a guided breathing meditation, or even just having some breathing tools, or even just sitting down in the morning and remembering to take a few moments of deep conscious breathing is just so, it's so impactful. And Kristen, it's come up for me so much since we've started this program, this podcasting journey, because there's a lot of breathwork facilitators in the group and people that I've connected with and interviewed that teach breathwork, and it's come back into my life. And it's just, it's wonderful. I'm going to start sharing more breathing exercises in my little Facebook group for the Bloom with a Boom podcast, and in my podcast, like those little mini episodes that I was telling you about.
I love that. I went to therapy some years ago, and my therapist noticed that like I held my breath all the time. I did. And
Yeah.
it was like a way of like, I don't want to feel difficult emotions. So I'm just not. But then it's like paralyzing for your whole body, and it doesn't really feel good and it doesn't really serve us. And I've learned a lot since then. But she gave me this little necklace, and that was like a thing she did. And she liked to give a necklace with a word on it, like an inspiring word. And mine said breathe. But I also
Oh,
had a little
nice.
bit of like, of course I'm breathing. I'm not dead. Okay. But like also she makes a good point. And I learned too that the power of exhaling, because for me, I had a lot of shallow breathing and I wasn't fully exhaling. And there's a lot that does for the body that's so good for the body and for the brain that I was like, oh, so a lot of my breath practice ended up learning how to be better at pushing the air out, because I would bring it in, but then I would trap it. And that doesn't really serve us. So I love what you're saying there. And I love that people will be able to connect and go look for those episodes and be able to
Mhm.
do a little breath work. Is there a final thought you have that you would want to leave with our listeners, or anything else that you'd want people to know?
I think we've covered it all. I feel this is so complete. Very grateful for the chance to talk about this and share my chanting practice and share my breathing practices. And I guess I would say, just like religion, it doesn't matter what your belief is, but faith is just a really wonderful way to enrich our lives with spiritual connection. Same thing with these practices, whether it's chanting or breathing. One day it might make sense to do some yoga. Another day, it might make sense to sit still and breathe or take a walk. But especially as people are going to be hearing this in the new year and recovering from, the holiday season and starting 2024 and going into an election season and all that craziness, is any morning practice, and it's great that we're tying everything together here, because I talked about having had a very frenetic morning. Any kind of daily practice, but a morning practice, I believe, is specifically great. Even if it's not the same one every day, even if it's just for a few minutes, any type of mindfulness in the morning, just stopping and shutting the outside world out is, well, not shutting it out, but shutting all the stimulation out, putting the phone down, is just so valuable. We've all heard it, and it's always good to keep hearing it. And thank you so much, Kristen. I'm so glad we got to meet.
Yes, thank you so much for being a guest, and I appreciate that. It's such a good reminder to not have our phone be the first thing we do in the morning. It does not serve us. There's got to be something else, whether it's movement, whether it's prayer, whether it's breathing, whether it's writing. I find I do a better job if I have something else that comes first that was intentional. It sets a different tone for the day. So I love that reminder. So thank you so much for being a guest. It's been a pleasure to get to connect and to get to hear
Same
from
here.
you and learn from you. I've learned some new things today, and I love that. Thank you so much for being a guest.
You are so welcome, and same here. Thank you.
We have some exciting things coming up. Our Solidarity Sister book club is starting tomorrow. If you are not in my Facebook group, you are going to want to join and be part of that, so you keep up with the weekly Zooms. We won't have our first Zoom until a week from tomorrow, because we need a week to read the first assignment and to be able to get started with the gifts of imperfection. We will be having those weekly Zooms and also be running an ongoing Marco Polo for just ongoing discussion. But Brené Brown's Gifts of Imperfection, if you have not read it, or if you're due for a reread, or if you're not, but you have wisdom to share, please come join us. And also on February 27th, I am so excited to be teaching a masterclass over at the Cozy Caregiver Cafe with Allison Wyman on one of my favorite topics, cultivating habits of self-love. And you guys, I'm just going to be honest, I did let a lot of those good habits slide over this really rough season for me. And coming back into creating this podcast and finding a creative space for myself, I am taking better and better care of myself, and I am feeling better. And it is a process, and sometimes we lose our way. All of us do. But I know the tools to help us to pull out of that, and I am getting back into it. So if you've lost your way, we have the tools to help us reconnect with how valuable we are and really loving ourselves. Oh, it's just at the heart of healthy communities. So come and join us for that. Check the show notes for a link. Also, you can find it on Instagram or on Facebook, Solidarity Sister Podcast on Facebook, or on Instagram, solidaritysister.Kristen Wilson. Kristen is Kristin. And you can save $5 with the link SISTER, SISTER. Thank you for being part of the Solidarity Sister community. We needed you. Solidarity Sister.